I'm George Galloway, and I present كلمة on Mayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. كلمة means free word. That's what I speak. So كلمة is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Mayadeen television. Welcome to كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Mayadeen television, coming to you from London, but discussing an issue that has crossed the entire world. The coronavirus 19 has cut a swathe through humanity. In all countries, though in some countries more than other. Amongst all communities, though in some communities more than other. We have discussed this subject many times here before, but there are many subplots to it to which we can now begin to turn our attention. And one of those is the race for a vaccine. Vaccines are a very, very good thing. Without them, humanity would have been in deep trouble from ancient, historic, traditional diseases like tuberculosis, like polio. I myself, as a child, had not an injection but a sugar lump because all around me, young children were being crippled and stunted by polio. Vaccination is a tried and tested way that medicine has found to combat deadly diseases. But that doesn't mean that every vaccine is a good thing. It doesn't mean that those who profit and profit mightily have all of our best interests at heart when developing vaccines. And over the course of the last couple of decades, the public has begun to fall out of love with vaccines. And that cannot be separated from the fear and loathing of big pharmaceutical giants whose purpose is not to make humanity less sick, but to make their own bank balances more fat. And in the race for a vaccine against COVID-19, there have been the old Cold War divisions. Russia, for example, developed the first and still the best of all the vaccines, Sputnik 5. In a sane world, it would have been rolled out in the last year, never mind this, across the whole world, but it was not, because countries like Britain and the United States simply would not countenance purchasing a Russian-made vaccine. China made an excellent vaccine, and very early, and not just one, but 5 Chinese vaccines have been proven efficacious around the world. Even in Western countries, there was cutthroat competition between the big pharmaceutical giants and between countries who were, even when they were in alliance together in the European Union, for example, determined to cut each other's throats and get the lion's share of the vaccine for themselves. Some countries, like Hungary, despairing of getting the Western vaccines in sufficient quantity, began to go around the back of the European Union and deal with countries like Russia and China to get them. So there's been a vaccine war, or a race at least, to get the biggest market share. Imagine we're talking about market shares when humanity itself faces a potentially existential crisis with this pandemic. I'm joined by a group of distinguished experts. I'm merely the enthusiastic amateur in these affairs. Dr. Niall McRae is a senior lecturer in mental health at King's College in London and is a prolific author. Dr. Niall, thanks for joining us. Give us your overview about the vaccination issue in relation to COVID-19.
Well, you used the term tried and tested, George, a few moments ago. And the thing is that these vaccines are not properly tried and tested. It normally takes 7 to 10 years to develop an effective vaccine. And what needs to be tested is not just the effectiveness of that vaccine, but also its safety. What we've got now is a mass experiment going on. So the drug companies and governments have decided that these vaccines are safe. Well, no vaccine is perfectly safe because we know that people have anaphylactic shock and there's various neurological symptoms that people can get from any vaccine, even the ones that are tried and tested, like meningitis, for example. But the COVID vaccine has been rushed. It's been rushed and they've been brought out under emergency provisions. The long-term effects of these vaccines, the Pfizer one, for example, won't be reported until 2023. This is a vaccine that millions and millions of people around the world are taking. Of course, this is very good for Pfizer. What sort of things do we need to worry about? Well, we need to worry about the short-term effects, where we've already got evidence from care homes in Britain and Germany and Norway, and in small countries that have vaccinated the whole population, like Gibraltar and United Arab Emirates, where it's quite clear that there's a 1 to 3 week period in time where, due to the lowering of the lymphocyte depletion, people are more vulnerable to the very disease that they're being vaccinated against. But we know that, and that's a temporary effect. What we don't know is the long-term effects. And when I see government ministers and their scientific advisors say these vaccines are perfectly safe for all, my blood boils. These vaccines have not been tested on pregnant women. They haven't been tested on women of childbearing age. They haven't been tested on children. And they haven't been tested on the elderly. And I think we've been sold on this idea, or society has been sold on this idea, that the vaccine is the saviour. The vaccine may well help. I'm not discounting it. It may well help, but we are taking a risk. And I think that risk needs to be given much more consideration than it's currently given in the mainstream media, which are just acting as lackeys, as propaganda tools for governments.
What choice did we have, though? This was a potentially existential challenge. This could have wiped out tens, scores of millions of people around the world. What are you going to do, wait 7 to 10 years until we've satisfied every question that you've raised there?
It has been a serious respiratory infection, not quite as bad as is made out. I mean, in Britain there is a death toll which sounds horrific. 120,000, I think we've got. That's a large number. But many of that 120,000 did not die of COVID-19. Any death of somebody who has tested positively within the last 28 days will go down as a COVID death. Now, what we know is that the PCR test, which is the most common test that's being used to diagnose COVID, picks up past infections, or even picks up fragments from the atmosphere. This is what Kary Mullis, the inventor, the Nobel Prize-winning inventor of the PCR test, said. It should never be used for diagnostic screening for infectious disease. Patrick Vallance, the government's chief scientist, admitted, because they want to shift over to the lateral flow test now, which is a bit more accurate, he admitted that the PCR test is so sensitive that it doesn't just pick up whether you're infected now. It will pick up if you've had an infection over the last year since COVID started. So that's an admission by the chief scientist that they're using a test which is not actually telling you if you have the disease now.
Daniel Cosby, you're a political activist, a member of my own party, the Workers' Party of Britain, but you are also a software engineer. You know about systems. But you also know, don't you, that there are many people in the population who reflect the kind of skepticism, more than skepticism really, if you'll forgive me, that Dr. Nile is enunciating here. How do you account for that? You're a process man, a scientific man. Does it horrify you that this level of skepticism about our medical profession exists?
I think we have to balance people's understanding of the medical profession with how our entire society operates within a capitalist framework. And people generally do not feel that they can trust the media, that they can trust the government, which is right. We should absolutely be sceptical of these things. And we absolutely should question these things. But we also have to realise that questioning certain things, as our media does, like, is the Chinese vaccine dangerous? Is it effective? The media will tell you that it's not effective, it's dangerous, it's not tested. And in fact, the Chinese only recently released it from being an emergency vaccine themselves, where they'd inoculated some million people in China, into a widely available vaccine within China and the rest of the world. So they have waited in their case, same as Russia, that only recently became available. So that is, on balance, a relatively cautious effect. And we also have to look at the as you mentioned, it's an emergency. We need a vaccine, we need people to be vaccinated. We should absolutely look at whether it's been safe, but we have to understand, have the appropriate steps been taken commensurate to the emergency that we're in. We're not going to, wait to check all the lifeboats are safe if we're on a sinking ship. We're going to get in one and get
Quite
off the
so.
ship.
I myself took the Pfizer one. I'm so old, I got it a couple of weeks ago. Don't tell my wife, she thinks I'm 45. But I would have taken the Russian one. I offered to take it on air because I trusted the manufacturers of the Russian vaccine. You make the point about capitalism, but and of course you're right, but Cuba made a vaccine, China made a vaccine, Russia made a vaccine. These are not part of the international capitalist conspiracy, are they?
No, but that's where the profit motive comes in. So we're looking at the US and European media launching an all-out war against these vaccines in these countries to say that, these can't be trusted, we're the best, you should buy from us.
Mark Wadsworth, you too are a political activist, a very long-standing member of the Labour Party, before being grotesquely, unfairly expelled from it on fake charges of anti-Semitism, like many others, I should say. Now, I made the point, and Daniel's just underscored it, there are many parts of the world that can't get access to the vaccines, so these debates we're having are slightly esoteric. But there are also parts of our own Western societies where skepticism about vaccination seems extraordinarily high. Ethnic minority communities in Britain, for example, have been disproportionately badly affected by the coronavirus, yet are disproportionately resistant to getting the vaccination. Your explanation, please.
Well, first of all, you've mentioned the disproportionality. That black people, if you saw the first pictures in the media of victims of COVID-19 way back in March last year, you saw a sea of African, Caribbean and Asian faces. And so that was because black people are in the front line of the National Health Service. They haven't been given proper protective equipment. They're public facing. And so therefore they were the first victims. Having said that, there is a hesitancy, that's what it's called these days, that's the trendy word, for resistance to taking the vaccine because of the history of medical racism. We only have to turn our minds back to the Tuskegee experiment in the United States that you'll be familiar with.
I'm not, tell me.
Where black men, African American men in the US were injected with syphilis, and many of them died. as a result of that experimentation. And that was way back several decades ago. And only recently has the American government issued an apology to their families. And so there's a big, cynicism, skepticism. Are we going to be experimented on again? There's a rumor going around that this is implanting chemicals into black males so that we can't reproduce, like a sort of population bomb on us. And so there are big fears. I myself have taken the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine like you, George. And we should remember that it was produced by two migrants, a couple from originally Turkey who went to Germany. And,
Kurdish people from Turkey.
That's right, yes. And we get a hell of a kicking in the so-called West, in the Northern Hemisphere, as migrants and children of migrants. And yet, in a way, you can see we're helping to save people in the world. Yet, only 10 countries in the world have taken 75% of the vaccines. There are 150 countries, mainly in the global south, that haven't had a single vaccine delivered to them. And they are relying on China, they are relying on Russia for supplies in the future, and India, in fact. And so my view is that, yes, there are risks attached, but we take a flu vaccine. I do every year. Smallpox was eliminated with vaccines, yellow fever. You talked about, what was it you mentioned?
Polio.
Polio.
Children in iron lungs when we were young.
You see, you took a sugar lump.
Yeah.
Later it was an injection. Tetanus.
Yeah.
Another example. And so we need to be protected, and we can't shy away from the fact that we are dying in big numbers. And so, if there isn't an attack on what we call in the grassroots black left vaccine nationalism, that is that the West is hogging and hoarding the vaccines, then all hell will break loose in terms of what will happen to those populations.
Let's go across to the United States. Alexis Baden-Meyer is in Washington, D.C. She's the political director of the Organic Consumers Association, Regeneration International USA. Now, Alexis is another skeptic on the level of effectiveness of the vaccine and also on its fair distribution. Welcome, Alexis.
Thank you so much for having me, George.
Is there currently a war around the world in the race to get vaccines?
Yes, I think that we have been put in a position where it's all or nothing. We have been told we need to shut everything down until there's a vaccine. And that has put a lot of pressure on this situation, this question of whether the vaccines are safe, whether they're effective, whether they're going to work, whether they will relieve us from the shutdown and the closures that we've experienced. So yes, I think that it's especially heightened because it's been promoted as really the only solution to relieving us from lockdowns is to vaccinate. And that's where I have the big disagreement with vaccination. It's not that I am opposed to vaccinations in general, or that I'm particularly concerned about their safety or effectiveness. What I am concerned about is that we've taken on this all or nothing public health approach. We've been told it's vaccines or nothing. And I don't think that's true. And what I would like to see is, even now, I think that we could save lives by doing more testing, by using cheap, effective antiviral medications like ivermectin, and by boosting our population's health. Now, I work for the Organic Consumers Association, so of course, we would have liked everyone to have been eating organic, toxin-free, nutrient-dense food last year or forever. So I would like to see a more comprehensive public health approach than just this shutdowns, vaccines, all or nothing system.
Is it true that developed nations are stockpiling over 1 billion doses of vaccines?
Well, unfortunately, I'm jaded enough to believe that it's about corporate interest. I wrote an article about Bill Gates, and the conclusion I came to in writing that article is that he was more concerned about the profits of the vaccine companies that he's invested in than he was about public health. So that's the model that I'm seeing. It's all about corporate profits. So if you have something cheap, off patent, like hydroxychloroquine, that's not going to make anybody any money. You know, vitamin C, vitamin D, that's not going to make anyone any money.
In your view, has the vaccine been politicized by the media?
Well, I've never said that there's no point in vaccination. But what I see that is troubling is that it's complete lockdown until we can have a vaccination. And that just simply factually was never the case. And it was never enough to protect the people who needed to be protected. I work in food and agriculture. There's an organization called the Food and Environment Reporting Network. They've been tracking COVID cases and COVID deaths in meatpacking facilities, on farms, and in food processing. And you know, it's just been a complete crisis in the United States. And that's because the companies, Tyson, JBS, National Beef, Cargill, Smithfield, they were told by the federal government that their workers' health was not their responsibility, that they would see no liability if there were COVID cases or COVID deaths among their workforce. And therefore, they did not test their workers. They did not provide paid sick leave. They pressured their workers to work when they were sick. And this is going now.
Will you yourself take the vaccine?
I thought you might ask me that, and I've been thinking about that all morning. You know, I am a public transit advocate. I would like to see more rail and less cars, right? And I know that rail is a lot safer than car travel. And yet I produced two beautiful little babies, and when they were still, you know, precious and young, strapped them into car seats and put them on the road, knowing that they could die in a car accident. And so that's sort of how I feel about the COVID vaccine. The COVID vaccine is probably not as dangerous as driving a car, probably. And so, you know, the jury's still out on that. We don't have the stats yet, but I'm guessing it's safer to take a COVID vaccine than to drive in a car. So I question myself. But you know what? It's going to depend primarily on whether I'm forced to do it. That's not a great situation. I think that our medical decisions should be voluntary. And I don't think that folks should be forced to get vaccinations. I think that we have to have public health protocols that, you know, might sometimes separate vaccinated from unvaccinated people. But normally for general life, I don't think that's necessary. And I don't think we should all be forced to take vaccines.
Much more of that coming up after the break. Stay tuned. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Mayadeen television, coming to you from London, but discussing a truly global, the global issue of this day, which is the coronavirus 19 pandemic, which has cut a swathe through humanity in all parts of the globe, and in particular, the response to it, the vaccine war, the vaccine race, which has broken out. Western companies declaring that only their vaccine is safe and that no one should buy the other fellows, the Chinese fellow, the Russian fellow. And the problem between North and South, where the rich northern countries are buying up all the vaccine stocks, leaving the South to wait until they can be afforded some of the precious vaccines. In the South, they're turning to Russia and China, which brought out the first vaccines, arguably the best vaccines on current form, at least. Maybe that these Western vaccines will outstrip them. Who knows? We can't compare in the West because we're not allowed to buy Chinese or Russian vaccines. And then the question has just been posed by our American academic: are vaccines the best response in any case? Certainly, Dr. Nile, were the vaccines the only response? That was essentially the point that was being made from Washington, was it? That it was this all or nothing approach that was the main problem.
Yes, and the problem is that these vaccines, as I mentioned earlier, have not been properly tested yet. And I have some serious scientific and ethical concerns about the vaccine. For 11 years, I sat on an NHS ethics committee. I was also a clinical trial manager for 4 years. So I know about clinical trials, and I know about the ethics of research participants taking the risk, because everyone takes a risk when they go into a drug trial. Everyone takes a risk when they take a drug. Drugs can all have side effects. Vaccines can all have adverse reactions. But normally we weigh up the pros and cons, and we're guided by doctors, we're guided by experts as to what is the best thing for us to do. Now, scientifically and ethically, there's big problems. Scientifically, there's problems about the effectiveness, there's problems about the harms. But ethically, I've got even more concern. Anyone taking part in a vaccine trial, and to some extent, you, George, are taking part in a vaccine trial by taking that Pfizer jab. And luckily, you haven't had any adverse reactions.
I didn't even feel it going in.
Right.
It was absolutely flawless.
But obviously, some people are having adverse events. There's been thousands reported on the MHRA yellow card system, and there's been, there have actually been hundreds of deaths reported within 2 weeks of taking the vaccine. Patients need to have informed consent. And what's happening with the vaccine is that it's neither informed, nor is it consent, nor is it choice. It's not informed.
Well, it is choice. You're not forced to have it.
Right, at the moment. Now, then, at the moment, as it stands, people are not able to exercise informed consent, or the large bulk of society who don't read medical papers and that sort of thing. All they're getting for information is state propaganda. And that state propaganda is hugely funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Millions and millions of pounds are put into the BBC. Millions of pounds go into the Imperial College that got us into the lockdown in the first place. Millions and millions of pounds go into Oxford University's vaccine group. And of course, government ministers and scientific advisors, many of them have huge investments in these drug companies. But I'm sort of going off. I want to talk about it. So we're not really informed. People are not really informed because they're not hearing about the side effects.
Are we ever really informed? I mean, if I had a problem with my computer, I would ask someone who knows about computers to fix it. I have a problem with my health, or potentially, I trust my doctor.
But
isn't that the way it works?
Would you trust Matt Hancock?
No, but I trust my doctor. And my doctor tells me to get a flu jab. My doctor tells me to get this Pfizer injection, and I trust her.
Okay. Well, the other thing is about choice. And at the moment, no one is being forced to take this vaccine, although there have been some concerns about elderly people in care homes being given it even when they didn't actually choose to take it. But no one's being forced at the moment. That is likely to change. We've got some employers talking about no jab, no job. We've got the vaccine passport, and the vaccine passport will not just be for travel. It looks like it's going to be used for your ability to go to the theatre, to the library, to the pub.
The British government have said that they have no plans to introduce such a vaccine passport.
You believe them?
Actually, I do, yes.
You're on record believing the government is not going to bring in a vaccine passport.
Yeah, I'm on record.
Yep. Okay.
Dan, this might sound off the wall. it might sound really left field, but I date the huge collapse in credibility of government, of the state, of the mass media to the Iraq war. Now, you may say I'm obsessed by the Iraq war, but I think we have underestimated the extent to which all existing institutions have been shot through in their credibility by what happened over the Iraq war. Now, if the government told me, if the media told me that it was raining outside, I would really have to go to the window and check. Am I being crazy here?
No, I don't know if I would put a specific date on it or a specific event. It's been a long series of events that have chipped away, and I would put it back to sound like a typical lefty, Margaret Thatcher. That really was the period when we changed from having a functioning social welfare state into outright neoliberal policies, where every aspect of society was being chipped away and eroded, from the NHS to libraries to school meals, everything that makes up the kind of social welfare state that we had. And what replaced it was a series of privatisations of all these things and companies looking to make profit. So suddenly, normal people were unable to access all the things that helped them enjoy a normal and full life, and instead they were being lied to through the media and by the government about how life would be made better by all these little privatisations. All these companies would come in and take care of you, and you wouldn't have to pay for it at first. But now you have to pay for every little thing, and the quality is worse because these companies are out looking for a profit. And you know, these adventures in Iraq, Afghanistan, and all over the world, built on by lies, again, does nothing to help the credibility of the government and media.
Let's hear from Dr. Evans Agilisopoulos from London. Dr. Evans is a former university lecturer, but a writer on politics of world economy, focusing on Greece, which you may remember fell foul of the European Union's neoliberal economic and other policies not so long ago. Dr. Evans, welcome.
Yes.
Is it true that developed nations are stockpiling over 1 billion doses of vaccines?
Big Pharma are mainly based in the big countries of the West, and they're obviously trying to use vaccine diplomacy as a weapon against poorer countries and in competition, in particular, with the Russian Sputnik vaccine and the 5 Chinese vaccines. So I presume they are stockpiling, 1, to try and keep the price high, and 2, as a way of pushing their diplomatic agenda with this vaccine.
Is there a kind of war going on around the world to get more stocks of COVID vaccines?
Well, the main company that I've looked at, which is Pfizer, which is the one which is leading the vaccine rollout in the UK and is the #1 on the planet, has had a lot of lawsuits against it for dodgy medicine. They've had to pay $2.5 billion fines in the USA, and Nigeria has also started a $7.5 billion lawsuit against them. They've also been found guilty, if I'm not mistaken, in around 8 countries for bribing doctors for their vaccine. So it's not that these companies are 100% trustworthy, and they've also managed to agree with every European government that no one can complain about the vaccine if something goes wrong. And we've already had many instances of people who have taken the vaccine and they've had problems up to and including death.
What about the politicization of the vaccines by the media?
The main question is this vaccine rollout actually linked to a health virus, or is it about the fourth industrial revolution and what they've announced in Davos, which is basically automating production around the world and making billionaires more and more richer? And they're going to use vaccine diplomacy as a way of controlling populations. We've already heard discussions about vaccine passports and access to services only if you've had the jab.
How have the people in Greece dealt with the pandemic, and how do they see these vaccines?
Well, the main problem in Greece are the economic effects of the lockdowns, which are obviously linked to the vaccines. The government said that we go into lockdowns to basically flatten the curve and save everybody. But the lockdowns now have been going on for almost, in Greece, the second lockdown started in November, and it's not going to end, from what they say, until May. Greece has gone through a 10-year IMF economic assault, and now it's losing all its tourist business. The Greek government has come up with a plan that we should all have a vaccine passport, and therefore that's the way we can reopen the tourist economy. But have these vaccines been tested on all the layers of the population? I mean, are children going to get the vaccines? No one really knows. And the population is quite skeptical in Greece because they don't trust the healthcare system, which has been perpetually under collapse financially. And only 3% so far have taken up the vaccine. So a lot of people are very frightened of what effects it might have in the long term, because it's only just appeared. We can remember thalidomide in the 1960s. It was rolled out in 1960, but its full effects were around 1965.
And what is the cost of places like Greece of this lockdown?
I can't see a viable economic solution to this problem, primarily because most industries were closed in the last 2 decades because of globalization. And the only industry that was left was basic farming and the tourist industry. Tourism in 2020 was at around 8% of 2019. So the Greek government only collected around 4 billion euros in tourist income. If this continues for 2021, and then again in 2022, the country will be totally bankrupt. There's no way out of this.
I'm sure Germany will bail them out like they did the last time. Not. That's right up your street, Doctor, that kind of, shall we call it, skepticism?
Well, I think we should all be skeptics. And isn't it funny how in this COVID situation we're in at the moment, under the COVID regime, as I call it, that skeptics are being hounded, skeptics are being vilified for asking legitimate questions. There's this term, anti-vaxxer, I'm sure you've heard of it. Anti-vaxxer is used as a cheap slur against not just people who are completely extreme, they're against any vaccine for anything.
There are such people.
There are, and they're a small minority. I'm not against all vaccines. I've had vaccines, my children have had vaccines, but I have got scientific and ethical concerns that I believe are completely legitimate. And at the moment, we're not getting any debate on the mainstream media at all.
Except here on Kلمة. But the point that he made there is gainsaid by the practical outcomes. I'm aware, you're more aware as a specialist in mental health, of the opportunity cost of lockdown. the damage to people's mental health, the damage to the economy, therefore the long-term damage to people's well-being and so on, of course. But we're in the middle of a lockdown here now in Britain, which has dramatically reduced the number of cases, the number of hospitalizations, and the number of deaths. That cannot be denied.
I think it can be denied completely. If you look at a bad flu season, you might get a spike in December, you might get a spike in January or February. It changes. And we have years where we don't have very much flu. 2018, 2019, and 2019-20 were both actually quite low for flu. With a flu season, the flu virus naturally hits a peak and then it starts to decline. Now, obviously, there's a flu vaccine that some people are taking, but we know that the flu vaccine is only partially effective. Now, the first flu vaccine was developed in 1931, and here we are, nearly 100 years on, and they still cannot perfect a flu vaccine. Flu vaccines are often only about 30% effective. No one has ever developed an effective coronavirus vaccine in decades of trying. And this is why they've gone for this novel technology. The Pfizer jab, which you took, and you took, Mark, in a way it's not really a vaccine. It's actually gene technology. So some messenger RNA is inserted into the cells in your body so that the cells produce a protein that will then kick off antibodies. It's not like a normal vaccine. A normal vaccine is where a small amount of the disease is given to you, and your immune system then can fight it and recognize it so that it knows how to deal with this disease if it ever happens again. These messenger RNA vaccines that Pfizer has produced and some other companies, we're in uncharted territory here.
Sure. We can help each other out at the end of this broadcast, because he's got me doubting.
Looks like it, doesn't it, George?
For someone your age and mine, there's an extraordinary deja vu here. The original Sputnik shocked the world. The Americans, the British, had no idea that the then Soviet Union could send a spacecraft up to orbit the Earth. They were shaken rigid by it. The Sputnik vaccine is having something of the same effect. They can't believe that this Russia that they constantly denigrate and demonize and do their best to subvert is still able to come up with a vaccine that is more efficacious than theirs and was out on the market quicker.
Yes, and that's why my father, who was a Jamaican who served in the RAF in the Second World War, went to the Soviet Union. He went to Cuba during the time of Batista and helped in the struggle to get Castro in as the leader. So we have a history as black people of support for great countries like what was then the Soviet Union is now Russia, for China. I've got a Chinese phone on purpose. I think it's the best technology and I want to support the Chinese economy. But let me get back to the point that Dr. McRae mentioned a moment ago about informed consent. I fully support that because of the skepticism in the African, Caribbean and Asian communities.
I'm looking at your pamphlet, which is an excellent one, and I just quote from the front page. We are appalled at how many black people are dying, including those doing their job caring for the sick and elderly, and will not keep quiet about it. Black political unity is essential to tackling the crisis. Well worth a read, that pamphlet. Dan, at the end of the day, somebody is making money out of the vaccines. but they make money out of making suits, out of producing meals in restaurants. Someone made money out of making my shoes. But that's the world we live in. We can't disdain to partake of something just because somebody is making money out of it.
Well, quite. Otherwise, I'd be sitting here naked if I didn't participate in the buying and selling of goods for profit. It's what we have to do. You know, we live in a very sceptical society for very good reasons. As Mark pointed out, people don't trust the government, people don't trust the media, people don't trust these things. And, you know, we need to look at how we can build a society that isn't cutthroat, that isn't about making the most money and seeing what you can get away with in terms of risk to the population, because as we see, that doesn't work when it comes to things like this. We hit a wall when it comes to things like healthcare, especially things like vaccinations, because we do actually need herd immunity, not in the way that Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings were envisaging it, letting it run through the population and you know, not worrying about how many people died, but in terms of vaccinating the population in order to inoculate the most people. So it can't be done on the basis of people take a vaccine if they feel like it.
But
now, I'm not saying...
Would you trust Bill Gates more than your own natural immune system?
Why do you have this thing about Bill Gates?
Well, I think Bill Gates is on a mission. He's a man on a mission, isn't he?
Are the Chinese on a mission? Are the Russians on a mission? Are the Cubans on a mission? I mean, I trust my own immune system. I think it's important to eat healthily, take vitamins if you need to, all these kind of things. But equally, we have limitations. We developed vaccines for a reason. So we should be very sceptical of this cutthroat competition.
But we're right to be suspicious of Big Pharma.
Yes,
I mean,
of course.
If you look at AstraZeneca, which is the great white hope from Oxford, they're charging South Africa twice as much as they're charging countries for the vaccine in the north, the west. And it will be until 2024, we're told, before South Africa has been able to vaccinate most of its population, whereas with Britain, we're talking about by the end of the year. So there's a huge global disparity, and then there's privatization that's going on. Not just the Bill Gates of this world, but the Richard Bransons and Virgin that are in the health service and profiteering with the you know, the support and you know, active you know, promotion of the Tory government.
But Mark,
look, I'm all for scepticism. That's what this show is all about. كلمة. That's what this show is all about. But I'm against people putting on tinfoil hats and spinning conspiracy theories and throwing out buzz names, dog whistle names, Bill Gates, the kind of the equivalent of Rothschild. I'm against that because the cost is people declining to take a vaccine that might save their lives. So I'm going to ask you all now in roundup. You've taken the vaccine. Will you encourage others to do so?
I'm actively encouraging people to take the vaccine with informed consent. It can't be compulsory. It mustn't be based on state coercion. I've got a picture of myself online taking the vaccine to lead by example. So yes, I think on the balance of the facts in front of us, take the vaccine if you're black.
Daniel, you're a young man. They haven't got round to you yet for sure, but will you take it if offered it?
It should be several months, but yes, I will take it. I think we have to be sceptical about the government, the media, the systems we live in. But when it comes down to these actual products, they are not going to produce something that's going to kill everyone in the world. They're not putting little microchips in them. These conspiracy theories...
Neither are they, by the way,
damage.
neither, if you forgive me interrupting you, as a caller to my show the other night said, putting pork in it so that Muslims won't be able to take. Yes. These kind of conspiracy theories are dangerous.
That one's funny, but it is dangerous because, like I said before, this requires a response on a societal basis, and it requires a majority of the population to be vaccinated to get out of the woods on this.
Dr. Nile, Last word to you, sir.
No, I won't take the vaccine, and I won't engage my children in this mass experiment. I think it's curious that here I am sitting with three lefties, cuddly lefties, who...
Don't ever accuse us of being cuddly. You'll find out one day just how not cuddly we are. Go ahead.
But you're all sceptical about capitalism, aren't you? Global capitalism, and I'd agree with you on that. And yet, unlike me, you're promoting this vast market for Big Pharma. You're promoting it. You're not using your critical reasoning about this experimental treatment. It is not a conventional vaccine, and nor do healthy, working-age adults or children need to take it. I think that older people, or frail people, people with sorts of conditions that you mentioned, Dan, maybe should take it once it's been properly tested, just like they take the flu vaccine. But there certainly should not be a population-wide imposition of these vaccines, and any sort of apartheid over people who are vaccinated and people aren't is totally abhorrent.
Well, it's been Kalimahora tonight, all right. Very divergent views and trenchantly expressed. I hope you have enjoyed it. I've been George Galloway. This has been Kalimahora on Al Mayadeen Television. Thank you for watching.